This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. What I'm looking at today is two-sentence horror stories, a new anthology series that premiered on the CW relatively recently, I assume. This is only the first season, and that's what it says on Netflix. But at the same time, on IMDb, it's listed as the second season. So I don't quite know what's going on about that. As far as I'm aware, what's on Netflix is the first season. In any case, this is shockingly good. And keep in mind, this premiered on the CW. The CW, the network known only for DC Comics adaptations of varying degrees of quality. So to see this, a well-done anthology series on the CW, literally blew my mind, because this is one of those things that should not be, especially if you take into account reviews for CBS All Access's The Twilight Zone, a streaming platform. The reviews for that series have been mixed, that the CW could get it right with the restrictions that a network has, and CBS All Access can get it wrong with very little in the way of restrictions is weird. In any case, this is a surprisingly, shockingly, I say, good anthology series. At least its first season is. Now let me explain that it's called two-sentence horror stories because two sentences are the framing device, in the sense that you have a sentence when a story begins, and you have a sentence at the end that brings it all together. It's a clunky device. It works in some instances for some stories, other stories not so much. So I don't like its title. I don't think the framing device is very effective. But what matters most are the stories. And the stories are, for the most part, well told, interesting, well directed, visually fascinating, and just, it's a really good series. Shockingly, again, I am amazed that this is as good as it is. The first story is called Gentleman, and it's essentially a serial killer type story. It has a twist, which you'll probably see 3 or 4 minutes before the series tells you. It's very predictable. It's not bad, it's well acted, but it doesn't do anything that you haven't seen elsewhere done better. But for something that appears on network TV, it's pretty good. Again, it's not going to take you to places that you haven't been, but it's well done for what it is. The second story is called Squirm, and it resides firmly in the arena of body horror. It's pretty effective. You get a lot of mileage out of the stuff you don't see more so than the stuff you do. It's a revenge story, and it works pretty well, very much part of the Me Too movement, and it's effective. Again, surprisingly effective. And as an aside, I want to mention something here that's crucial to the success, at least in my eyes, of two-sentence horror stories. I can barely get that out. It's such an awkward title. It's that the actors are unfamiliar to me. In all, I think, 7, 8 stories, I don't recall any actors that I had seen before. And for me, that's a plus, because too many familiar faces will take me out of something. For instance, I tried to watch Life After Beth, clever title there, and I had to stop. Why? Because actors I had seen before kept getting thrown in my face. Paul Reiser here, Paul Reiser is actually the only one, Molly Shannon, there. It just keeps happening in that movie. It feels like extended cameos, and it was distracting to me, and I actually had to stop watching it. With two-sentence horror stories, you don't get any of that because, at least for me, I didn't recognize any of these actors. So I could just lose myself in a story a bit more, and that's important. In any case, I was talking about Squirm, and it's very much in a body horror type vein. 2 out of 2 at this point. I'm very surprised so far. Story 3 was called Legacy, and it's very much in the J-horror vein. I'm talking about movies like The Grudge, Ju-on, Dark Water, stuff like that. It's a take on J-horror, and it works pretty well. The story is interesting, and it stars the actress who played Madame Gao on Netflix's Daredevil. She's just really good, but she's the only face that was familiar to me. So again, I didn't get that effect of being taken out of it. She just fit in the role, and it worked. So once again, 3 out of 3. This is just the weirdest anthology series. Even great anthology series, I don't tend to see so many episodes in a season work. Now keep in mind, the season for this series is only 8 episodes, but all of them are interesting, and there are no clunkers so far in the bunch. Episode 4 is called Hide, and this is a winner. It's probably one of the best episodes of the series, and it has what I like to call layers. There's 2 types of horror being explored in this episode, and it's so cleverly done, and thematically it works. It doesn't have you asking, like in the case of some episodes I'll get into, why things are happening, what the message is, what's the point. So Hide is just so effective and so efficient at how it does what it does. Clearly one of the standout episodes of this first season. The 5th episode is called Cyan, and it's about this guy who has, I believe it's cancer or something, and he's also gay. And this is a fascinating episode, if only because its depiction of a relationship between 2 gay people is probably more joyful than you traditionally see anywhere. Sure, the guy has a terminal ailment, but just the 2 of them together is really life-affirming, and it's interesting to watch. And as I mentioned before, I don't know who these actors are, so it feels very naturalistic. And this being 2-sentence horror stories, things are pretty much going to go to shit really quickly, and they do. And this is where it kind of goes off the rails a little bit, because thematically, I wasn't sure what it was trying to tell me. I don't want to give away its mysteries, but at the same time, it just gets very muddled. There are too many things dueling with each other in terms of thematics that I just wasn't sure what it was trying to tell me. It's still an effective story, but it's not a very well-told story. It's a bit muddled in terms of its messaging, but it's watchable. It's pretty good. It's probably the weakest. Maybe not. I think it's still better than Gentlemen, but it still could have been stronger if its themes were a bit clearer. Episode 6 is called Tutorial, and this is a really clever episode. In fact, it's almost too clever for its own good. It revolves this, it's like YouTube essentially, but you got to pay attention to the details of this episode. As I said earlier, it's too clever for its own good, but it still manages to pull it out. There's a time watching this episode, thematically speaking, I thought it was in a tailspin. I thought I knew what it was going to do and where it was going, but then it pulls a left turn. But it feels like less that the story required that left turn than I want to do something that the people watching won't predict. And yet it manages to pull it out. It went into, as I said, it went into a tailspin, but pulled it out. Tutorial's actually pretty interesting. Not as clever as it thinks, but it works. Against all odds, this episode works. I enjoyed Tutorial on the whole. Episode 7 is called Only Child, and this one was a bit hard for me because, once again, it shares a quality that the weaker episodes of 2-sentence horror stories have. Namely, that there's a pointlessness to it. Essentially, it revolves around a family and an only child, i.e. only child. And the grandmother who lives with the family is convinced the child is possessed by an evil. Psst, he really is. In any case, child possessed by evil, grandmother is dispatched. That's pretty much it. There's no real resonance to it. There are no deeper themes. Once again, this is not a bad story, but it's just kind of there. Perhaps one of the weaker stories of the season. Episode 8 is called Little Monsters, the final episode of the first season. And this is a pretty interesting episode because, like Hyde, it has layers to it, politically speaking. It has layers to it, and they work really well and really effectively. So it's clever. It revolves around this neighborhood, a poor neighborhood. There are projects, and those are not exactly known for being the home of rich people. In any case, there are these children in these projects, and something is taking the children. And some of them get together to solve what is happening to their friends. It's a pretty effective story because it has layers. It's more, the monsters aren't only talking about the creatures that are killing the children. You have to watch it to see what I mean, but it's really fascinating. And I mentioned earlier that this is a really good anthology series. Each episode is probably, I want to say, 20 minutes and change. So that's not a lot of time to establish character. A good short story is an art form, more so, I think, than longer form stories, because you only have so much time to lay out your events. Things have to proceed in such a fashion that they make sense, but they're also satisfying in a narrative sense. And shockingly, again, I can't get over how shocked I am by this, the stories that make up two-sentence horror stories are not only satisfying, they're also very well told. If you haven't seen this, it's on Netflix. If you've been watching a CW, you probably know about this already. And take a watch. This is really good stuff. This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. Peace.